It had the sleek predatory lines of a Messerschmitt, the heart of a German killer, and the rising sun painted on its wings. This wasn't some secret German prototype smuggled to the emperor. This was Japan's own creation, an aircraft designed to be the ultimate predator, but cursed by its own ambition. Welcome to Historical Digs. For today, we unravel the tragic story of the Kawasaki Ki-61 Hien, a plane that could have changed the war, but instead became a symbol of desperation. A German heart in a samurai's body. In the halls of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff in 1940, a quiet but intense debate was raging, one that would set in motion one of the most ambitious and ultimately tragic projects of the Pacific War. While the Imperial Navy's Mitsubishi A6M0 was proving to be a world-beating dogfighter, its design philosophy, prioritizing extreme range and phenomenal agility by sacrificing every ounce of protection, was viewed with deep skepticism by Army planners. They had watched the air war over Europe evolve into a brutal contest of speed, altitude, and firepower. They saw fighters like the German Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the British Spitfire engaging in high-speed energy tactics, diving on their opponents from above and using superior engine power to climb away, a style of combat the fragile Zero could not survive for long. The Army concluded that the future of air combat belonged not to nimble turn fighters but to heavily armed, rugged, and powerful energy fighters. They needed a machine that could not only dish out punishment but also take it. Their gaze turned to an unlikely source, Germany. Kawasaki Aircraft, under the direction of the Army, undertook the monumental task of securing the manufacturing rights to Germany's legendary Daimler-Benz DB601A engine, a licensed variant of the one powering the formidable Bf 109. This was a radical departure from Japanese industrial norms, which heavily favored simpler, more robust air-cooled radial engines. In April 1940, a team of Kawasaki engineers visited a Daimler-Benz factory in Germany, meticulously studying the engine's blueprints and manufacturing processes. They returned to Japan not just with technical data, but with a new design philosophy. The project was entrusted to chief designer Takeo Doi, who, along with his design team, including engineer Shin Owada, began to design an airframe around this foreign heart. The result was the Kawasaki Ki-61, codenamed Hien, or Flying Swallow. It was a machine that seemed to have been born in the wrong country. The liquid-cooled engine allowed for a narrow, beautifully streamlined fuselage that minimized drag, giving it a profile similar to the Bf 109, which Allied pilots would later mistake it for. Before we dive deeper into the Ki-61 story, hit that like button and subscribe to Historical Digs. Your support helps us unearth the untold stories of aviation's most battle-hardened war machines. But the differences were more than skin deep. Unlike the Zero, the Ki-61 was built for survivability. Later models of the Ki-61 incorporated 13mm of steel armor plate behind the pilot's head and back, a feature that would have been considered heretical dead weight by the Zero's designers. Furthermore, its wing fuel tanks were partially self-sealing, using layers of rubber and fiber to mitigate leaks and fires from bullet strikes, a direct lesson learned from the Zero's infamous flammability. Its armament was also a significant step up. While early models carried a mix of two 12.7mm and two 7.7mm machine guns, the design was ultimately modified to carry 20mm HO5 cannons, derived from the German MG-151, giving it the firepower to tear apart Allied bombers. This was Japan's response to modern Western fighters like the P-40, the Spitfire, and even the twin-engine P-38 Lightning, a true modern interceptor. The curse of the HA-40. The promise of the Ki-61 was immense, but it was built on a foundation of industrial quicksand. The Daimler-Benz DB601 was a marvel of Teutonic engineering, a finely tuned instrument that demanded exotic alloys, microscopic tolerances, and a level of metallurgical science that wartime Japan simply could not replicate reliably. The licensed Japanese version, designated the Kawasaki HA-40, became the aircraft's central and catastrophic flaw. The task of mass-producing such a complex engine proved to be a circle of hell for Kawasaki's engineers and factory workers. German production relied on high-quality chromium and nickel steel alloys for critical components like the crankshaft and connecting rods, With Japan's access to these raw materials choked off by the Allied blockade, Kawasaki was forced to use inferior brittle manganese steel substitutes. The results were predictable and terrifying. The HA-40 engines failed constantly and in every conceivable way. The most common and deadly issue was catastrophic crankshaft failure. Pilots reported engines seizing without any warning, often during critical phases of flight like takeoff or combat maneuvers. The intricate gear-driven supercharger was another point of failure, with stripped gears and poor tolerances causing failure at high RPMs. The liquid cooling system, a novelty for Japanese ground crews accustomed to robust radial engines, was a persistent nightmare. A single leaky gasket or a fractured coolant line, problems exacerbated by poor quality control, could lead to rapid overheating and engine seizure. Maintenance logs from frontline units read like a litany of despair. The 68th Sentai, one of the first units to operate the Ki-61 in New Guinea, reported that its serviceability rate often fell below 40%. For every hour a Hien spent in the air, it could spend more than a full day in the workshop. Mechanics, lacking specialized tools and training, were often forced to cannibalize parts from one broken engine to fix another, creating a vicious cycle of decay. As the war progressed and Allied B-29 raids began to pummel the Japanese mainland, the situation devolved from a crisis into a catastrophe. The Kawasaki engine factory at Akashi became a prime target, and the resulting damage shattered any hope of improving quality control. In fact, quality declined sharply as experienced workers were replaced by unskilled laborers, and material shortages became even more acute. By late 1944, the curse of the HA-40 had created a bizarre and tragic spectacle at Kawasaki's Gifu factory. Estimates suggest over 275 perfectly completed Ki-61 airframes sat parked in neat rows on the airfield, fully armed and ready for combat, but inert. They were fuselages without a heart, grounded indefinitely while waiting for engines that were either too flawed to install or simply didn't exist. Japan's most promising interceptor was being defeated not by Allied fighters, but by its own engine bay. Glimmers of greatness. And yet, for pilots lucky enough to fly a Ki-61 with a well-behaved engine, the aircraft was a revelation. When it worked, it was everything the Army had hoped for and more. Its combat debut over New Guinea in the spring of 1943 sent a shockwave through Allied air units. Pilots of the U.S. 5th Air Force, accustomed to the predictable tactics of the Zero, were caught completely off guard. The Ki-61, which they quickly nicknamed Tony due to its supposed Italian design origins, refused to play by established rules. American P-40 Warhawk pilots who try to escape a pursuing Tony by diving away, a standard and effective tactic against the Zero and Oscar, were horrified to find the sturdy Hien staying right with them, its airframe easily handling the stress of a high-speed plunge that would have torn the wings off its naval counterpart. The Hien's strengths were perfectly suited for the fighting style of its opponents. While it couldn't outturn a Zero, it possessed a superb roll rate at high speed and excellent energy retention. This allowed its pilots to engage in boom and zoom tactics, making diving attacks and then using the aircraft's power to climb back to altitude for another pass. In the hands of a skilled pilot, the Tony was a deadly adversary. The 68th and 78th Sentai, despite being plagued by the engine's reliability issues, scored effectively against P-40s and the new P-38 Lightnings. Allied intelligence reports from the period are filled with urgent warnings about this new fighter, advising pilots not to engage it in vertical maneuvers and to use their own superior numbers to bracket and trap it. The psychological impact was clear. The Ki-61 shattered the myth that all Japanese fighters were fragile, lightweight dogfighters. The Hien's finest and most desperate hour came during the defense of the home islands in 1944 and 1945. As waves of B-29 superfortresses began their devastating high-altitude raids, Japan found itself with very few interceptors capable of reaching them. The Ki-61 was one of the few that could. It could climb to the bomber's operational altitude of 30,000 feet and, with its heavy cannon armament, had the firepower to bring one down. The 244th Sentai, an elite homeland defense unit led by Captain Teruhiko Kobayashi, became the public face of this desperate struggle. Flying their distinctive, brightly marked Ki-61s, the pilots of the 244th flew relentlessly against the bomber's streams. When conventional attacks failed, they formed special tayatari, or ramming units. These pilots would strip their aircraft of non-essential weight, sometimes even removing most of their guns, and use their Hien as a human-guided missile, aiming to slice through a B-29's wing or tail stabilizer. These were not the organized suicide attacks of the kamikaze, but rather a last-ditch tactic born of fury and desperation. These glimmers of greatness showed what the Hien could have been, a truly formidable defender of the homeland. But its engine troubles ensured these moments were the exception, not the rule. A desperate fix and a doomed legacy. By the winter of 1944, the Ki-61 program had reached its breaking point. The production lines at Kawasaki's Gifu plant had ground to a halt, not from a lack of airframes, but from the complete failure of the HA-40 and its even more unreliable successor, the HA-140 engine. The sight of 275 brand-new, engineless Ki-61 fuselages sitting idle on the factory tarmac was a galling symbol of industrial failure. The Army was faced with a stark choice: scrap hundreds of perfectly good airframes or attempt something truly radical. In a move born of sheer desperation, the Army Technical Branch ordered Kawasaki to perform an emergency engine transplant. The plan was to take the Hien's sleek, high-performance airframe and fit it with a reliable, powerful, and most importantly, available engine. The Mitsubishi HA-112-2, a 14-cylinder air-cooled radial engine that powered several other successful Japanese aircraft. The engineering challenge was immense. The team, again led by Takeya Doi, had to figure out how to mount a wide, blunt-nosed radial engine onto a narrow fuselage designed for a slender, inverted V-12. The aircraft's center of gravity, cooling systems, and aerodynamics all had to be completely recalculated. Working at a feverish pace, the engineers achieved a miracle. In just 3 months, the first prototype of the new hybrid fighter was rolled out. Designated the Ki-100, it was an unusual-looking machine, wedding the Hien's graceful wings and rear fuselage to a brutish, muscular nose. Yet when test pilots took it into the air, they were ecstatic. While the Ki-100 was slightly slower than the Ki-61 in level flight, the new engine was lighter, allowing for a lower wing loading. The result was a fighter with astonishing agility. The Ki-100 was arguably the finest Japanese fighter to see combat in the last year of the war. It was thrown into battle against the best the Allies had to offer, including the formidable P-51D Mustang and F-6F Hellcat. In dogfights, the Ki-100's phenomenal turning ability allowed it to get on the tail of its American opponents with surprising ease. Veteran pilots lauded its beautifully harmonized controls and its docile handling characteristics. For the first time, Japan had a fighter that combined the agility of a classic dogfighter with the speed and robustness of an energy fighter. It was the machine the Ki-61 was always meant to be. But this triumph was a tragic footnote. Although the first Ki-100s began to arrive in March 1945, they weren't fully operational in large numbers until May. Fewer than 400 were built before the war ended. The Hien's legacy is therefore a story of what if. It represents a fatal miscalculation, a decision to pursue advanced foreign technology without the domestic industrial base to support it. The sleek flying swallow, a machine with the potential to challenge Allied air supremacy, was ultimately grounded by its own mechanical heart, a cursed masterpiece that serves as a powerful lesson on the relationship between ambition and capability in the crucible of war. So, was the Ki-61 a lost opportunity that could have changed Japan's fate in the air, or was it a flawed concept from the start, a high-tech gamble that a collapsing empire could never hope to win? And if you want to see more stories of the fascinating and often frustrating machines of war, make sure to subscribe to Historical Digs and hit that notification bell. Until then, remember, history is full of hidden gems if you know where to dig.